How did China go from an unstoppable force that was supposed to surpass the United States and become the ultimate superpower of the world to an unraveling nation where the whole thing is about to collapse like a Jenga tower made of counterfeit Legos? Well, let's talk about it. Oh, Chinese real estate. You know a country has a real estate problem when it builds 60 million empty apartments and 20 million of them are unfinished because the developers ran out of money mid-construction. Yeah, we all know China's housing market isn't just really in a crisis, it's a flaming wreck that's about to take the whole economy down with it. Here's how it all went down. For 2 decades, China's government let property developers build like drunken Sims players with unlimited money. The result? Well, that was massive overconstruction, entire ghost cities, and a market where 70% of household wealth is tied up in real estate. Enter Evergrande, the absolute king of bad financial decisions, which racked up over $300 billion in debt before imploding in 2021. Then came Country Garden, another real estate giant which is now teetering on bankruptcy after failing to pay its debts in 2023. Property prices, well, they're down about 6% year on year, the sharpest decline in a decade. Mortgage boycotts, they're rising. Pre-sold but undelivered homes, well, they're in the millions. And guess what? Local governments were making 30% of their revenue from land sales. But now that no one wants to buy land, their budgets have more holes than Swiss cheese in a gunfight. So what's the government doing? They're trying to bail out developers, buy up unsold homes, and pretend everything is just fine. It's all fine, guys. But the money just isn't there. Beijing pledged $138 billion to stabilize the market. But considering that's less than 3% of annual home sales, it's like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. You need duct tape, guys. You need duct tape. So China's total debt, public and private, is over 300% of its GDP. In other words, for every dollar China's economy produces, it owes 3. And keep in mind that this number was only 150% in 2008. Now in 2013, China's government debt to GDP was 37%. That was a very low number. However, today it's at about 86%, meaning that China's been taking on tons of debt over the last 12 years or so, but even that number is kind of a lie. When you factor in all of the off-the-books debt from local governments and state-run money pits like the SOEs, the real debt levels are closer to 130 to 150% of GDP. You see, local governments are the real ticking time bombs. They borrow trillions through shadowy local government financing vehicles to build highways to nowhere and stadiums nobody uses. Now, some cities are literally spending more than 100% of their annual budget just to pay interest on their debt. Now, the Central Bank of China approved a $840 billion debt refinancing plan in 2024, essentially letting local governments swap their unpayable short-term debts for slightly less unpayable long-term debts. The translation: we'll just move the bankruptcy deadline to a later date and hope that people forget about it or we figure it out. So China's not going to default on this debt overnight, but they're drowning in debt and can't borrow their way out of this hole forever. But on top of their debt crisis, they also have a population crisis. In 2023, China's population declined by 2.08 million people, the second straight year of population decline, and the first time the country has shrunk since the Great Leap Backward, aka the 1960s famine. China's birth rate is sitting at about 6.7 births per 1,000 people, and has a total fertility rate of about 1.15, which is about the same or lower than Japan's, depending on the year. Now this, some are saying, is the legacy of the one-child policy, which lasted from 1980 to 2015, which left China with a 4-2-1 family structure. 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 poor bastard who has to take care of all of them. The workforce peaked in 2015 and is now declining, which means China is running out of young people to make stuff. In the next decade, the labor force will shrink by at least 70 million people. And this is not a we'll fix it later situation. You can't print more babies, for now. And government incentives like tax breaks and please have some more kids campaigns are failing spectacularly. And to think that China used to grow at 8 to 10% annually, but now the World Bank projects between a 4 and a 5% growth in the coming year. and potentially falling to 4.2% in 2026, and that's assuming the government isn't fudging the numbers, which, let's be real, is very possible. There's also some other signs that the economy isn't doing so well in China. Youth unemployment topped 20% in 2023 before the government conveniently stopped publishing those numbers, because if you don't see it, it's not a problem, right? Foreign investment is actually decreasing. FDI inflows dropped by 30% in early 2024. And multinational corporations are diversifying to India, Vietnam, and Mexico rather than reinvesting in China. So here's the thing. Is China going to collapse? Well, if a few policy decisions go poorly, it could easily collapse, sure. I mean, all it take would be for an actual real estate implosion and their entire economy comes crashing down. But what's likely going to happen is China isn't going to collapse in a dramatic or Hollywood-style explosion. There won't be a Lehman Brothers moment, probably, and there won't be a Weimar Republic hyperinflation, no zombie apocalypse, nothing like that. But the days of unstoppable China are over. Instead, China is headed for a long, slow, Japan-style economic stagnation. Except, instead of high-tech innovation and sushi, it's going to be bad debt, demographic decline, and unfinished skyscrapers as far as the eye can see. You know, about a decade ago, economists thought that China could overtake the United States economy by, well, today actually, 2025. But guess what? That's not happening. And that's because China's growth is slowing down way faster than expected. In fact, in the coming years, China is projected to fall below a 4% GDP growth rate, and potentially in the 2030s fall below a 3% growth rate. Meanwhile, the US economy will still be growing at 2 to 4% every single year because that's just what it does. At this rate, China's economy may never surpass America's economy. Right now, even the most optimistic view will say that China could overtake the United States economy in the mid-2040s. And that's assuming everything goes right. And remember that GDP isn't everything in regards to who's the superpower of the world. A big thing that really matters is productivity, innovation, and economic power per capita. China's GDP per capita is at about $12,700, while America's is at about $82,000. So if you use that metric, then China's not even close to surpassing America. If we're talking military strength, China has spent decades building up its armed forces. It now has the world's largest navy by the number of ships, but the US still wins in terms of tonnage and capability. China has the world's biggest missile arsenal. It's rapidly advancing its space warfare capabilities, and it's growing its nuclear arsenal, which might hit 1,000 warheads by 2030. But in terms of overall power projection, the US still spends $877 billion a year on defense compared to China's $225 billion. The US has 800 military bases worldwide, meanwhile China has maybe 3. The US still has the most advanced air force, nuclear submarines, and stealth technology. And arguably more importantly, it has pretty large alliances from NATO to Japan to South Korea, Australia, and so on. Meanwhile, China has, their buddies of North Korea and maybe Russia? China's Belt and Road Initiative is also facing a lot of turmoil right now. And if you don't know what that is, China was buying up businesses and infrastructure and people and governments all around the world, and they were also giving out tons of loans to all these places. And well, for example, Sri Lanka had to give China a port on a 99-year lease because they couldn't pay back their debts to China. 60% of China's foreign loans are now to countries in financial distress, meaning China is spending hundreds of billions of dollars just bailing out its own borrowers. It seems like China's great grand plan is just crumbling down. So will the country collapse? I guess we will see. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. See ya.